Between the years 1970 and 1975, a sadistic killer roamed the American South, murdering by any means and leaving a trail of bodies in swamps and woodlands that would eventually lead to his home in Prospect, South Carolina. Nicknamed Pee-wee for his small stature, the monster, Donald Henry Gaskins Jr., was also given another equally descriptive title, the meanest man in America. Gaskins' 5-year killing spree was far from the extent of his savagery. He had murdered before, while in prison for another heinous crime, and would continue to kill while locked up decades later. In total, he is said to have taken the lives of 15 victims, at least according to official accounts, and destroyed many more in a spate of crimes that lasted almost 30 years. Prior to his execution in 1991, he wrote a book called Final Truth, in which he claimed to have killed as many as 110 victims. Though his words should obviously be taken with a grain of salt, he was a notorious liar after all. The book does provide an insight into Gaskins' childhood, his time behind bars, his life on the road, plus his own reasons for killing in such a brutal and malicious manner. It is this book that we will draw from in this video, as well as the official accounts, as we dive deep into the case of America's meanest man. But be warned, there are many graphic details ahead. I'm MrBizzare, and welcome back to the channel, where we dive into the dark abysses of reality, exploring unsettling tales and disturbing accounts from around the world. As you might expect, Donald Henry Gaskins Jr. didn't have the best of childhoods, to say the least. His sister, who was 16 years younger than him, described their situation as one of extreme poverty while growing up in rural South Carolina. Due to his small size, Pee-wee was constantly bullied, not just at school, but also in his own home. His stepfather would frequently beat him, and it's alleged that his mother sold him to various boyfriends or clients for sex. When he turned 11, he dropped out of school and became friends with 2 boys named Danny and Marsh. Together, they formed the Trouble Trio and would terrorize the neighborhood by breaking into homes, stealing cars, and assaulting other young boys, often. Their reign of terror only ended when they were all caught gang Marsh's little sister, and, as punishment, their parents beat the boys until they bled. Danny and Marsh moved away from the area shortly after that, but Gaskins continued to wreak havoc all by himself. At the age of 13, Pee-wee was interrupted by a young girl while breaking into her family home. She struck him with a hatchet, but Gaskins managed to pry the weapon away from her and hit her over the arm and head with it, before leaving her in a ditch and fleeing the scene. Luckily, the young girl survived, and Gaskins was later arrested and convicted for assault with a deadly weapon and intent to kill. Interestingly, and somewhat sadly, the court case was the first time that Pee-wee had heard his real name spoken in his entire life. Since he was still a minor, Pee-wee was sent to a reform school, the South Carolina Industrial School for Boys. Again, likely due to his small stature, he was immediately targeted and assaulted, both violently and by the other boys. In order to protect himself, he curried favor from the boss boy by offering himself as a slave. He also tried escaping many times and was successful on one occasion when he joined a traveling carnival. Whilst there, he married a 13-year-old girl, but decided to return to the reform school to finish his sentence. A note written by the school's headmaster in 1950, when Gaskins was 17 years old, described him as antisocial with recurrent instances of psychopathic lying and stealing. We consider him dangerous, and also he has the homicidal tendencies peculiar to a paranoid type, the headmaster wrote. If only someone had heeded these warnings back then. Gaskins was released from the school when he turned 18. He got a job working on a tobacco farm, but soon got involved in insurance fraud, offering to burn down the barns of local farmers for a fee. When his employer's daughter became suspicious and asked him about the fires, Gaskins panicked and split her skull with a hammer. For this, he received a 6-year prison sentence at the South Carolina Penitentiary for attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. Learning from his previous stint at the reform school that he wasn't going to have it easy with the other inmates, Gaskins hatched a plan. He would kill a fellow inmate so that people would see him as a power man, the adult version of a boss boy, and leave him alone. His victim would be the most feared man in prison at the time, Hazel Brazel. Gaskins set about earning Brazel's trust, and then one day he slit his throat. Claiming self-defense, Gaskins was sentenced to 6 months in solitary confinement and had 3 years added to his sentence. However, he had achieved his objective, and after that, he had found life in prison far more enjoyable. That was until 1955, when Pee-wee was notified that his wife was filing for divorce. Enraged, Pee-wee escaped from prison by hiding in the back of a garbage truck and made his way down to Florida. There, he enjoyed a second marriage for all but 2 weeks before meeting a woman named Betty Gates. With her, he traveled to Tennessee on the pretext of bailing out Gates's brother. But things took a turn when he found out that Gates's brother was actually her husband, and he too had escaped from prison. Police interrupted the love triangle at a hotel and sent Gaskins back to prison, with an extra 9 months added to his sentence for aiding the escape of a prisoner. In August 1961, at the age of 28, Gaskins was released, but his stint behind bars had done little to curb his criminality. Just 2 years after his release, he was arrested again, this time for the rape of a 12-year-old girl. Gaskins ran away while awaiting his sentence, but was captured in Georgia after his third wife, a 17-year-old girl, turned him into the police for statutory rape. Following 6 more years at the Columbia Penitentiary, Gaskins vowed never to return and moved back to South Carolina. He found a job working for a roofing company, but also found that he was unable to ignore them aggravated and bothersome feelings, as he called them. Wee Gaskins' darkest days were far from behind him. In fact, he was just getting started. As an adult, Pee-wee was anywhere from 5'2" to 5'5" depending on the source, and he weighed approximately 130 pounds or 60 kilos. Now, he was far from what you would call an intellectual, but he was street smart and was described by one writer as having a keen sense of humour and a friendly, entertaining personality. However, according to South Carolina State Senator Dick Harpootlian, he wasn't some Ted Bundy serial killer. This was a guy who just killed people because to him, they crossed the line, whether it was drugs or race, or he thought they were somehow going to betray him, or even had betrayed him. His solution to the common, ordinary problems was to kill the problem. He was either real nice, or he killed you. The first of Gaskins' confirmed killings outside of prison happened in November 1970. Supposedly, angry at his niece's drug use, he lured the girl, Janice Kirby, aged 15, and her friend, Patricia Ann Alsbrook, aged 17, to an abandoned house where he attempted to rape them. When he failed to do so, he beat the 2 young girls to death. A year or 2 later, Pee-wee poisoned a woman named Martha Ann Dix Jr., aged 20. Many potential reasons have been given for the killing, ranging from a rumour about Gaskins being the father of her unborn child, to a revenge killing for supplying drugs to his niece and her friend, the two girls he killed in 1970. As will become clear, there are many different motives and means attributed to Wee Gaskins. By his own account, he seemed to either enjoy killing or felt compelled to in order to quell his feelings of bothersomeness. In his memoir, he writes about driving along the highways of the American South, searching for victims along the coast whom he would torture and mutilate while trying to keep them alive for as long as possible. The method was unimportant to Pee-wee. He would beat, stab or suffocate them, and even claims to have eaten parts of their bodies while making them watch or even join in. According to Gaskins, his first coastal kill came in 1969 when he picked up a blonde female hitchhiker. "All I could think about is how I could do anything I wanted to her," he wrote, when she laughed at his proposition to have sex. He claims that he sodomized and tortured her before dumping her body in a swamp. No bodies have ever been found, and his claims have never even been verified. But if he is to be believed, Gaskins confessed to killing 80 to 90 such victims in this way. But this kill was never actually confirmed, so his first official kill is considered to be his niece and her friend in 1970. In his book, Final Truth, Gaskins described how he would get the urge to commit a coastal kill every 6 weeks, although he later said he needed to commit a kill by the 10th day of each calendar month. Like I said, he wasn't known for his intellect. He did also recount more serious murders and named 3 potential victims as Eddie and Bertie Brown, aged 24 and 20 respectively, and a man named Horace Jones, aged 40. It is thought that he may have killed them because of their race. They were African American, but again, these claims are unverified. The next in a string of confirmed killings came in June 1973 and were almost certainly racially motivated. Gaskins had become friends with a 22-year-old woman named Doreen Hope Dempsey. Dempsey already had a 2-year-old child, but upon hearing that she had become pregnant again, this time with an African-American man, Gaskins flipped. He raped and drowned Doreen, along with her daughter, Robin Michelle Dempsey, in the pond in his backyard. Their bodies would be among the 8 discovered at his property in Sumter, South Carolina, when police finally caught up to him. Not that the signs weren't there to catch him earlier. By 1973, Pee-wee had taken to driving around in an old hearse. He would joke with the local residents, telling them he needed the car to transport all the people he killed to his little private cemetery. He even added a bumper sticker that said, "I haul dead bodies." Little did they know, he wasn't joking at all. In June 1974, Gaskins shot his friend and former criminal associate, Johnny Sellers, aged 36, in the back of the head. Sellers' fatal mistake was asking Gaskins for money he owed from the sale of a stolen boat. Gaskins also stabbed Sellers' girlfriend to death for good measure, fearing that 22-year-old Jessie Ruth Judy would tell the police about the boat theft and murder. In 1975, Gaskins ramped things up a notch. He offered his services as a contract killer and slit the throat of Silas Barnwell Yates, aged 45. He was paid $1,500 for the deed by John Owens, whose wife was in a dispute with her ex-husband, and both wanted him eliminated. Gaskins insisted that he had murdered Yates by karate chopping him in the neck, despite forensics stating a knife was clearly used. That should give you some insight into just how deranged Wee Gaskins really was. 2 months later, on April 10th, 1975, America's meanest man stabbed Diane Neely, aged 25, and shot her boyfriend, Avery Lee Howard, aged 34, to death. One of the reasons given for killing Neely was because she had threatened to report Gaskins for allowing minors to have in his home. Howard, meanwhile, had supposedly asked for money to cover his legal expenses, and Gaskins was worried he might tell police about his own illegal activities. To make sure that his crimes continued to go undetected, Gaskins then took the life of a 13-year-old girl, Kim. She was one of the girls whom Gaskins had brought to his home for underage, and he didn't want her telling the police, so he stabbed her. Rounding out the year, in October 1975, Pee-wee murdered Dennis Bellamy, aged 27. Dennis was the brother of Diane, whom Gaskins had killed months earlier. When Dennis arrived to collect payment from Gaskins that had been promised for some stolen guns, Pee-wee took him to the woods behind his home and shot him in the back of the head. Then, minutes later, when Dennis's half-brother came to check on him, he was murdered the exact same way. John Henry Knight, the half-brother, was just 15 years old. These murders are believed to be the last committed by Wee Gaskins as a free man, but that doesn't mean he had finished his killing. Following the disappearance of 13-year-old Kim Gaskins, police had started to hone in on Pee-wee. A search of his home had turned up clothing that was worn by the girl, and when brought in for questioning, Pee-wee's criminal associate, Walter Neely, cracked under the pressure. On December the 4th, 1975, Neely led investigators to Gaskins' home cemetery, where they discovered the bodies of 8 victims. 6 months later, after being convicted of the murder of Dennis Bellamy, Gaskins confessed to the 7 other murders in an effort to avoid the death penalty. Frustratingly, the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional that same year, so Gaskins avoided the electric chair anyway, and was instead given 8 consecutive life sentences. 5 more murders were later attributed to Gaskins, bringing his confirmed kill total to 14, including the murder of Hazel Brazel whilst he was in prison. Unbelievably, he was still not done. On September the 2nd, 1982, while imprisoned in the high-security block at the South Carolina Correctional Institution, Gaskins murdered a death row inmate named Rudolph Tyner. Pee-wee had been hired by the son of one of Tyner's victims, Tony Simo, whose parents had been slain in a botched armed robbery. After failing to poison Tyler by lacing his food and drink, Gaskins rigged a portable radio with C4 plastic explosive. He told Tyner it would allow them to communicate between cells, but when Tyner held the speaker to his ear, as Gaskins told him to, the explosion went off, killing Tyner instantly. The last thing he ever heard was me laughing, Gaskins would later recall. Unfortunately for Gaskins, but perhaps fortunately for everyone else, by 1982, the death penalty had been reinstated in South Carolina. Upon being found guilty of Tyner's murder, Pee-wee was the first white man in the state's history to be sentenced to death for killing a black man. How ironic. Before his execution, Pee-wee gave a 331-page statement in which he described 15 murders as casually as most people tell what they had for breakfast, according to the state newspaper. In a final attempt to take back control, he also slashed his wrists with a razor blade. It took 20 stitches to save him for the electric chair, and so it was that, on September 6th, 1991, at 1:10 a.m., the meanest man in America was finally put to death. His last words were, "I'll let my lawyers talk for me. I'm ready to go." As for Dick Harpootlian, the state senator who secured his death sentence, "When I think of Pee-wee Gaskins," he recalled, "I think of that night when they called me and said, 'Pee-wee's dead.' The relief I felt." And so, that's it for today's bizarre story of Pee-wee Gaskins, the meanest and most violent man in American history. Let me know what you all think in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe for more bizarre stories.